David Parker didn't expect to be thrust into the spotlight when he boarded Flight 278 from Denver to Chicago. For him, it was just another business trip, sandwiched between conference calls and deadlines. But as the plane climbed to cruising altitude, he had no idea that this ordinary journey would become an extraordinary tale of courage, teamwork, and survival. It started with a ripple of whispers among the flight attendants. David noticed them exchanging anxious glances as they moved through the cabin. Then came the announcement, a calm but urgent voice over the intercom. "If there is a medical professional on board, please press your call button." David wasn't a doctor, but the call sent a shiver down his spine. He looked around and saw the same concern mirrored on other passengers' faces. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle toward the cockpit, her expression grim. Moments later, the co-pilot emerged, pale and visibly shaken. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice trembling, "I regret to inform you that our captain has suffered a medical emergency and is currently incapacitated. I will be taking command of the aircraft." Gasps filled the cabin. The gravity of the situation was clear. The co-pilot was now alone in navigating a plane with over 200 lives on board. As a software engineer with a passion for flight simulators, David's knowledge of aviation was purely recreational. Yet, when he saw the co-pilot's visible distress, something compelled him to act. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I'm not a pilot, but I have experience with flight simulators. If there's any way I can help, I'm willing to try." The co-pilot, Lisa Grant, assessed him with wary eyes. "Flight simulators?" she asked. "What kind?" "Mostly commercial jets," David replied. "I know it's not the same as the real thing, but I'm familiar with the controls and procedures." After a brief hesitation, Lisa nodded. "Follow me." The cockpit was a flurry of alarms and blinking lights. The captain was slumped in his seat, unconscious but breathing. Lisa quickly briefed David on the situation. They were en route to Chicago, but needed to make an emergency landing at the nearest airport, which was Kansas City International. "I'll handle the communication with air traffic control," Lisa said. "Your job is to assist with the systems and monitor the instruments." David nodded, taking the co-pilot's seat. The controls felt intimidating, yet oddly familiar. As Lisa contacted the tower, David scanned the gauges and screens, noting their altitude, speed, and heading. "Kansas City, this is Flight 278 declaring an emergency," Lisa said into the radio. "Our captain is incapacitated, and I'm the sole pilot on board. I'll need immediate clearance to land." "Roger that. Flight 278, came the response. "You are cleared for runway 1L. Wind is 10 knots from the northwest. Emergency crews are on standby." As the plane began its descent, turbulence rattled the cabin. Passengers clutched their armrests, some praying silently, others comforting their seatmates. In the cockpit, the tension was palpable. "We're coming in too fast," Lisa muttered, her hands steady on the yoke. "David, adjust the throttle to reduce speed. Pull back slightly on the controls to maintain our glide slope." David's hands moved instinctively, guided by years of virtual training. The plane responded, leveling out as they approached the runway. Sweat trickled down his temple, but he focused entirely on Lisa's instructions. "Flaps to 30 degrees, she commanded. "Flaps to 30, David confirmed, adjusting the lever. The runway came into view, a stretch of asphalt illuminated by landing lights. As the wheels touched down, a collective cheer erupted from the passengers. The plane slowed to a stop, emergency vehicles racing toward them. Lisa leaned back in her seat, exhaling deeply. "You did great," she said to David. "We both did." David's relief was short-lived. The realization of what they had just accomplished began to sink in. They had averted a disaster, but the experience had left him shaken. In the days that followed, David became an unwitting hero. News outlets hailed him as the passenger pilot, while aviation experts debated the ethics and safety of his involvement. Interviews, press conferences, and social media buzz kept his name in the headlines. Lisa reached out to thank him personally. "You've got a knack for this," she said. "Ever thought about becoming a pilot?" David laughed. "After this, I think I've had my fill of flying for a lifetime." Yet, as time passed, he found himself drawn to the idea. What if this was more than a one-time act of bravery? What if it was a calling? David enrolled in flight school 6 months later, determined to turn his newfound passion into a profession. The skies, once a source of fear and adrenaline, became a place of purpose and discovery. His journey on Flight 278 had been terrifying, but it had also awakened something within him, a desire to soar, not just in the air, but in life. Flight 278 became a case study in aviation safety, prompting airlines to revisit protocols for in-flight emergencies. David and Lisa's story inspired countless individuals, proving that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges. As David took to the skies in his own aircraft years later, he often thought back to that fateful day. It was more than just a flight. It was the moment he discovered the hero within.